Welcome, everybody, to our webinar tonight with Rabbi Jason Sobel. I'm guessing that a few of you guys know who he is already because you signed up for this and you maybe have attended some of his maybe you've been on his tours in Israel, or maybe you've read one of his books written with Kathy Lee Gifford, The Road, the Rock, and the Rabbi, or you have his new one, which I don't have yet, called Breakthrough, Living a Life That Overflows. Rabbi Jason actually spoke at our Modern Widows Club Leaders Conference last year in Nashville and brought the house down, and we really enjoyed it, and a lot of ladies were very inspired. I was fortunate to get to know Rabbi Jason a little bit more just over the last year, and to kind of learn more of what Fusion Global does. What you don't know about him is that he has a bachelor's in Jewish studies. He has a master's in intercultural studies. He is a Messianic Jew. He does Torah readings. I think you do those weekly. And a lot of people tap into those. You do a lot of speaking engagements. You're prolific. I mean, you're out there all the time. This is why you're busy. But what you don't know is that Rabbi Jason is at home with his kids, his two sons, doing online school, just like a lot of other people. And so he's getting the real COVID experience in school and having school-age kids. And I think he likes wine. I'm not sure. Is that okay to say?
Yeah, I do like wine. It's all good.
There you go. And so welcome, Rabbi Jason, to our Developing Our Spiritual Senses webinar tonight.
It's great to be here with you. Shalom, shalom. Thank you for having me. It was a joy and an honor to be with you at the Widows Conference, the Gathering Leaders Conference, and it's great to be with you. I'm excited to see what's going to happen.
Well, a few of the ladies said that they have both the books, and Jennifer Pachanich is over here saying hello to both of us, and Shelley. And so, I know, right? Some of the ladies are going to be on the con, and some are going to become your friends, because this is the first part. Well, right now we have 3 parts, but there may be more, but we went ahead and set it at 3. This one tonight, which will go for the hour, we're gonna let Rabbi Jason kind of talk about developing our spiritual senses, and especially in a kind of chaotic time right now in the world, where we're getting a lot of stimulus from a lot of different areas, and a lot of that ends up drowning out the antenna that I have experienced, that I need to be a very clear message from God and the things that I'm doing. And so when you get all this static happening, I have found that your senses actually are something that you can trust. And so if those are in tune, receptive to what God is here to guide you, to give you direction, you can trust, you can live with a lot more peace and a lot more calm. And we certainly want a lot more of that. We don't really have a structure for tonight. I'm going to let Rabbi Jason kind of talk about it. He's got some ideas of this subject. And then we're going to take questions. So if you guys have any questions, I'm going to be monitoring those. So there's a little chat. Most of you guys have already found it, or you've done these before. Just go ahead and post your questions, and I will get them to Rabbi Jason, as many of them as we can. I know that Rabbi Jason is one of the things that I've learned about Rabbi Jason is the significance of numbers in Judaism. And I just have to start before we get started. Is there an actual number that is significant for widows?
The number 60. Yeah, the number 60 is an important number because of the fact that the Bible talks about widows and 60 years of age, and supporting widows 60 years of age and up as being an important number. And actually, 60 is Hebrew's alphanumeric. So you write numbers with letters. And so the letter that represents 60 is the Hebrew letter Samech, and Samech literally means to support. So it's about being 60 is a number of support. It's also a picture of a circle, like surrounding for protection, surrounding to provide shelter. So there's just a number of different things with the number 60, and and specifically connected to widows in the scriptures. But I'm excited to be able to jump in tonight to be talking about these kind of beginning to talk about developing our spiritual senses, because we know there's 5 senses. There's sight, hearing, smell, taste, and touch. And just in the same way that the sensing organs that are connected to each of the senses send information to the brain that helps us understand and perceive the world around us. So in the same way that physical senses help us understand the world, in the same way it's important to understand that every physical sense has a corresponding spiritual sense. And I think that's really important to understand it, because our physical senses help us make sense and understand what's happening in our material world. And in the same way, we need to cultivate our spiritual senses if we're going to make sense of the world in which we live in, because we're not just physical beings, right? I think more accurately, we're actually spiritual beings that are having a physical experience. We're not physical beings having a spiritual experience. Does that make sense?
Yes.
Yeah. And so with that, and I think we see this going back to the biblical creation account in Genesis chapter 1. It says, in the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. And so what we have to understand is that God creates, the earth represents the physical aspect of creation, and heaven represents the spiritual aspect of creation. But notice what it says is created first, the heavens and then the earth. And it's really significant because it's the spiritual that gives life, the spiritual and emotional that gives life its fullest and deepest meaning. So the physical was designed to be a container for the spiritual and emotional. So when we only develop our physical senses, but neglect our spiritual senses, then we're missing out on the fullness of the divine design for how we were created to show up and to engage in the world. And both are important, both the physical senses as well as the spiritual senses. And I think that if we're going to experience true wholeness in our life and deeper meaning and significance in relationship, then we have to develop and cultivate our spiritual senses. And I think the first sense that I would like to chat with you all about tonight is developing our sight, developing our spiritual sight, and developing our spiritual senses, which is so important because I believe that there's a spiritual truth, which is this: you'll never be more than you can see. Would you all say that with me? I will never be more than I can see.
I can see. Seeing is believing, Rabbi Jim.
I love it. That is a truth. There's an aspect of seeing is believing, and that's right, Terry. You'll never be more than you can see. And so we have to develop our sight, because so much of our potential, so much of our spiritual potential, emotional potential, so much of the promise that we can experience in our life is connected to this ability to see. And this ability to see can be understood in a number of different ways. But one thing for sure is sight is about vision. And one of the things that, yes, Jen, Fortune, greater vision. You know, there's a something Helen Keller said that really impacted me. We all know Helen Keller. She did not have sight, and this is what she said. She said, the worst thing in life is not to be born blind, but to be born with sight and to have no vision.
True.
And so you can have 20/20 vision, 20/20 sight, and yet have no vision. And you can have physical sight, but no sense of purpose, no sense of meaning. And I think one of the things that I've experienced in my own life, I know in connecting and engage in being involved in the lives of other people, that oftentimes past traumas, pain, loss, fear can either blur our vision or can cause us to lose our sight, lose our vision altogether. And it's so significant because when you have a lack of vision, it always becomes a prison. A lack of vision, say with me, a lack of vision becomes my prison. Because
we don't want that.
No, we don't want that, right? No, because listen, because a prison is something that keeps you trapped. If you lose your vision, lose your purpose, lose your meaning, okay, because of trauma, fear, hurts, loss, pain, you wind up trapped. You become imprisoned. And look, it's something natural. And sometimes that's a season we go, like, of course, all of you here that have lost a husband or lost any loved one, right? There's a pain. There is sometimes this kind of a season where you can't see straight and it feels as if you're being confined and restricted. That's oftentimes a reality, but it's not the place where we're meant to stay. I mean, have you experienced that, Carolyn, in some of the things that you've seen or gone through?
Absolutely. I think a lot of widows lose faith altogether in anything. They don't understand life anymore. So trying to understand their spiritual life is even more complicated. And so, vision it's become like you have peripheral vision. When you become widowed, it becomes like this. Tunnel vision.
Yeah, and I think part of the healing process is expanding it out again. And that's on a spiritual level, that's on an emotional level, that's on a relational level, that's on a physical level, right? Sometimes, we do go like this because of things that happen and we just can't deal with all of this. But we have to again, we have to not lose sight, because when we lose sight, we become trapped. And I think, this is just a fun, just kind of a personal life story from my life, is that when I was about 16 years old, I fell in love for the first time. And her name was Joanna, and I met her in the place where all Jersey boys meet their first love, the mall, because I grew up in the mall state, New Jersey. And, we were dating and she was older than I was, and I lied to her about my age. and at some point she started to pressure me about wanting to get married. And I had actually dropped out of high school at the time, no job, no money. She wanted to get married. She wanted to get out of her house, and so she came to me and says, look, so eventually we were in the mall one day and they're having a sale on rings. And she said, let's go look. And she's like, oh, I like this ring. And I was like, but I've got no money. She's like, don't worry, I'll put it on my credit card and you can pay me back later. And we got engaged.
Right? What's wrong with that?
What's wrong with that? So no, her family got us set a date. And basically I said, look, I've got no job, no finances. How am I going to support you? She said, don't worry. My stepfather drives a New Jersey transit train. You can get a job driving a New Jersey transit train with him, ticket taking. You can work your way up to becoming a conductor one day. And at the same time, I had an opportunity to follow my dream to work in one of the largest recording studios in New York City. And I had to make a decision for her or the dream job. And at 17 years of age, I decided on the dream job. but here's the point that I'm trying to make is that if you don't have a vision and a purpose for your life, somebody else will give you theirs. And it's so easy for us to get trapped. It's so easy for us to lose sight of our passions and our purposes. And I think that we have to be really careful not to allow that to happen to ourselves, because God has a unique vision and purpose for each and every person, for each and every one of you that are watching today. But to understand that we have to have that sight, we have to have that vision, and and God will make that clear to us. But I think how is it? And I think another great example of that is this story of the 12 spies. God brings Israel out of Egypt. He wants to send them in to scout out the land of promise that he's going to give to them. 12 spies are sent in, and 10 come back and give a radically different report than the two, right? 10 of the 12 spies, they come back and they're like, the land is amazing. It's flowing with milk and honey. It's going to be great. I mean, it's a great land, but they're giants in the land. They're these really big people, and we're like grasshoppers in their sight. And the cities are fortified, and so they convinced the people that it was impossible to go in and take the land. To Joshua and Caleb, they had faith. They're like, listen, we have a promise. God is faithful. We have a purpose. God has a plan. Don't worry, don't fear. But they listened to the 10. They didn't listen to the 2. And the question is, how is it possible for 12 people to go in and people to see the same thing and come to radically different conclusions about the situation? And I think, one of the things we have to understand is that in Hebrew, the word for eye is ayin. Can you say ayin?
Ayin.
Right? And this is the letter ayin in Hebrew. It literally means eye. And you can see it has on top of it what looks like 2 eyes. Okay? And so there's
looks like Picasso to me.
Well, this one does. It's not an actual, this is the actual way it looks, but the 2 top parts, that's just an illustrated one. But I guess here's the point, right? Is that the reason why the ayin on a spiritual level has 2 eyes is because each one of us has, on a spiritual level, we have a choice of which eye we're going to look through. One eye is known as the ayin tov, which is the good eye. And one eye is known as, can you say ayin tov?
Ayin tov.
Ayin tov, that's a good eye. And one is the ayin ra, which is the evil eye, or the bad eye, okay? And so the problem is that the bad eye is the eye that sees all the problems, all the pitfalls, all the negativities. It's the eye that sees the black cloud but doesn't see the silver lining. It's the pessimistic eye, and it's the eye of fear. And the 10 only could see from a perspective of fear. They could only look at the pitfalls. They couldn't see it in light of the promise. And because they looked through the eyes of fear, they wound up missing, that whole generation that didn't have faith died in the wilderness because they lived from a place of fear. They lived from a place of negativity. And when you live from fear and negativity, you're going to miss out. You're going to miss out on your potential. You're going to miss out on the purpose and the plans, the divine plans for your life. And part of that fear, we know when we're living as fear, is like the spy said, the land is good, it's awesome, but Whenever we insert our big butts into the situation, there is always going to be a problem. We got to move our big butts. That's important. Stop inserting our big butts. We all have those butts. Okay. And yeah.
But it's so hard to stay positive all the time.
Our butts, big butts smell. I just want to say that. No, it's right. It's not, but that's why we have to cultivate. We have to cultivate. Now, you can't be positive 100% of the time. And being positive doesn't always mean like you have this cheery, sunny disposition, like you're Tigger, right? And you're just bouncing around, all happy, everything's good. No, that's not realistic. Okay. But we have a decision. Even Yeshua, Jesus says the two eyes. He says, if your eye is good, your body will be full of light. If your eye is negative, even the light will be darkness. And I think here's so the question I think we have to ask ourselves is, yes, I love Tigger too. But I think part of the thing that we have to understand is that there's a passage in the Bible, in Deuteronomy, the 5 books of Moses, sure as the eye of Jacob. And the idea of sure is the eye of Jacob is the Hebrew word batach, and it's actually seen as an acronym for 3 words. The B is for bracha, say blessing.
Blessing.
Blessing. The T is tov, say tov or good.
Tov.
Which is good. And the cha is chaim, got to say the chaim, which means life. And so part of cultivating the good eye is that we have to learn to see the blessing. We have to learn to see the good. And we have to learn to see life in people and in our situations and circumstances. And that's why it's something that has to be cultivated. It's a maturity. Mm-hmm. It takes maturity. You have to grow into this. I know. So let me stop there. Does that make sense?
Yeah, but I think that's why widows this is a perfect message for them, because widowhood, you go into that deep introspection, you see things differently now, because you go from this life and then you transition into this, you go from a wife to a widow in an instant, in one less breath. And so the sight, I always say this, that's why Modern Widows Club is so important, because when you get into a room full of women who are looking towards a trajectory for their life, it's so vital, because it's very easy to not see that trajectory in the future. You need to be around people who actually believe in you, and they can see the potential and the possibility in the future, because you simply cannot see it at that time. And so having someone you can trust that's around you, I mean, it truly means everything. And some of the ladies here on this call, I've mentored, have been deeply a part of their life. And I know you guys have struggled to see your future. And what he's saying, it's almost like I wish we could just cover the eye up, the evil eye, right? And only be able to see with the good eye, because that's your future. That's what God is waiting for you to wake up to.
Yeah, no. And I think part of it is sometimes we don't always feel it, but that's right. We need the people around that to help us see it and encourage us and understand it, because the good eye is the eye of faith and hope. And faith and hope go together. These 3 remain: faith, hope, and love are all tied together. And faith and hope go together. And part of what I define hope as the belief that your future is going to be better than your past. And so do we really believe that our future is going to be better than our past? And even when we don't feel it, we have to have the faith to say it, and because because I think there's a bigger, again, because the eye of faith looks beyond the physical situations and circumstances. Because what's going, it's like the 12 spies. Like, yes, there were problems. Yes, there were obstacles. Yes, there were threats. All of that was true, but there's a bigger reality because God is bigger than that. And I think this is part of it, right? This idea of our eyes are connected to our mind, right? So our eyes take in the sensory information. It goes, the optical nerve brings it to the brain. Our brain's like a computer. It processes it. And so there's two realities, right? We're either, our minds are meant to work like projectors. What does a projector do? It takes an image and it makes an image, it blows it up and makes it bigger. So the reality is we either the fear eye leads us to make our situations and circumstances so big and so that there's no hope. It's like, oh my God, my problems, my pains, it's so big. Our mind will blow it up and all the negative things. And then we feel overwhelmed, we feel defeated, we feel discouraged. So we either project fear as a result of looking through the bad eye, or we project faith. Projecting faith is making the spiritual reality, making God bigger than our situation and our circumstances. And when we do that, we can have hope.
And that's one of the things we finally identified this. You know, we do so much at Modern Widows Club in so many, but in the future, we're going to be using this hope, heal, grow, lead, like kind of saying. And what we found is that when widows come to us in the beginning, I mean, that hope is, I mean, they're hanging on by a thread. Like they're looking for every possible way that they can see the hope. And if they can hang on to that, even if it's borrowed, like I say, like just, you can borrow mine. Like if you need more hope, then just come here and let me help you, you know, feel more of that, because then that moves them into being able to heal. And that takes away that anxiety of, I can't see. It's like you're standing in a fog. You don't know which direction to go. And so in that kind of instance, it's a panic, you know, moment. My life is, there's so many secondary losses in widowhood that it's so funny that eyes are so close to the brain, right? You just wish you could actually see that good eye and it could impact your brain right away, but that just isn't how it works, unfortunately.
Yeah. Well, but that's even the point. Like, in a sense, there's a reason why it's called eyewitness testimony. Right? A testimony is an eyewitness testimony stands up in court because you're saying, I saw it with my own eyes, therefore I can bear witness to that this is factually true. Right? So that's why it's so important in developing this good eye that sees the life, the good and the blessing, that we need those that have walked through what we've walked through what we're walking through and have come out the other side. And that's why what you do is so important, because you can share from the real experience of having walked through it. You can say, listen, this is the process, right? There's a process, there's a natural process that most people go through. But look where we are today, right? And that testimony gives hope and encouragement, especially when it's multiplied by many voices coming together, saying the same thing. And there's power in that.
Certain, definitely, because when I was on Shalom in the Home, you know, with Rabbi Shmuley, on that TV show, they made me do these recorded videos. And I remember, I will never forget this one video that they showed on the show. And it said, it was me talking to the camera. And I said, you know, I just think this is how my life is always going to be. And I was at year 6 when I filmed that. And I just thought, how sad that I was projecting and putting on a mask for everybody that my life was good to go. And yet inside, I was so broken. But I was just looking for someone else, another widow that I could talk to that had that vision for her future. And I didn't have that, you know, until Rabbi Shmuley said, you know, the show was called Choosing Life. You know, you've given death too much hospitality in your life. And it's time to take that back now. And that's really what vision is about. This is what I believe for my life, and I'm going to walk in that direction. And I have no idea how I'm going to get there. And I have no idea who God's going to send into my life to help me get there, or where there even is. But I'm going to hope and believe and trust and all of these things. And that is so much easier in community. And so I've learned so much. You know, it took me 10 years to find a widow mentor. That's way too long. And that was really the beginning of MWC. I was like, this has got to end. There's too many inspiring women that I'm meeting, and I've got to do something. And so the something was just to mentor two ladies, but then it turned into what it is today. But I never gave up on that vision that there had to be somebody out there that raised their kids, had worked, was healthy, that was thriving. And what did thriving even look like? You know, that might have been like getting a shower. That might have been, you know, not going to bed every night after work, not drinking every night. You know, what does it look like? And so those choices that you make are really important. And the other thing I love about the community is the accountability, right? So if someone is over here and their evil eye is out of control, hopefully you have a trusted relationship with someone who just goes, let me tell you what, a different way to look at things. And it's beautiful when you see that light come back into the lady's eyes, and they're just like, oh my gosh, really? You think that could happen? And then when it actually does happen, that's where you really see
it's
glory
so
of God.
so yeah, no, it's amazing. You know, and I'll never forget, I was speaking to this after school program of kids that were in the inner city of LA, and many came from like difficult situations, a lot of gang situations in the area. And as I was speaking, and I was talking about, you know, what God can do in our life and vision and story of Joseph, and there was this one kid that God just kind of highlighted to me. And afterwards, when we went to have some time to eat with the kids, there was only one seat left, and it was actually right next to this kid, right? It's such a God thing. And we began talking, and he said, listen, I really appreciated what you had to say. He goes, but I'm really having a hard time like believing it. He said, let me tell you my story. He said, my mom passed away a few years ago. He goes, and then I was in a gang. I decided to leave the gang. I was walking home one day, and a former gang member went to shoot me, and my best friend jumped in front of me and took the bullet, and he died. And my aunt, who's become like a mother to me, she's in the hospital right now. They're thinking she might die of cancer. He's like, you know, how can I believe in God when all I've experienced is lost in my life? And, you know, I was like, man, this is really like a deep question. And I'm thinking, oh, how do I talk about God and evil? And theology starts running through my mind. And I realized, no, it's not a theological answer that's needed at this moment. And, you know, what I said to him, I said, look, I think what you have to understand is that, you know, I said, what you need to get is revenge. Mm-hmm. And he thought I was going to tell him to go get a gun and shoot somebody up. I said, look, just like I said, God didn't take your family and friends. Just like there's good, there's evil. God brings life. There's evil in the world that brings death. I said, you know, God, you know, the Messiah came that we might have life and have it more abundantly. There is a spiritual force, a thief that comes to rob and kill and destroy. And I said, by what I mean by what it is that you should get revenge is you have to make your life count. your friend laid his life down for you. The way that you get revenge is by paying it forward for every life that you impact, for every person that you touch, okay? You're in a sense getting revenge against the one who wants to take life and rob you of those relationships. And in that, as I talk with him, as I meditated upon that situation, one of the things that I realized is that God doesn't just want to heal our pain, he wants to redeem your pain. He doesn't want to just heal you from your loss, he wants to redeem your loss. And I think that is so important to remember, because it says, and it says God works all things out together for good for those who love him and who are called according to his purpose. But it doesn't say that God works all things out together for perfect. And there's a big difference between perfect and good. And I think when people think in their mind that God created the world perfect, God works it all together for perfect. No, God didn't create the world perfect. He created it good. And God doesn't promise that things are going to be perfect. What he does say is that things can be worked for good. So why is that significant? Because not everything that is good is pleasant. Good doesn't mean easy. Good, medicine, exercise, and surgery are good for you, but they're not necessarily pleasant. And if I ask you, like, Carolyn, how's your health? And you say good, what does it mean? It means everything is functioning as it should. And functioning as it should implies purpose. But when we find, and when we find our purpose, even in the midst of the pain, we become empowered. So God wants you to find the purpose even in the pain, even in the loss, because when you do, that is when you really can become empowered. And Carol, I'm sure you never expected that you'd be a widow and lose your husband when you got married on your wedding day. But here's the thing, is that it's not that God didn't cause your loss.
Right.
Okay. And the loss is horrible. And we never want to diminish the real pain and the real loss that's there and that gap in our life. But here's the thing, even through the loss, something good came out of it. Your pain, your loss was redeemed in the sense of, look how many lives you were impacted, right? Look, like, even though it was a horrible, and it's one of the worst things that could happen, right? God didn't, your loss didn't lead to you losing hope, didn't lead to you losing faith. It didn't cause you to crawl up and die. God used your pain, and your loss wasn't pointless. You didn't become powerless, but you became empowered, okay? And you've done something to empower others as a result. And that's amazing to me.
Yeah, well, I have a question for you, and this is going to be as equally hard as that guy's question.
Yeah.
Why do so many good men die?
Look, I mean,
Young.
Yeah. I mean, it's part of the bigger question of why is there so much suffering and loss in the world in general on all sorts of levels. And I think all I can say as a general answer to that, from which I understand, is that humanity all of us have been given a free choice, right? And going back to the very beginning, we made choices that brought brokenness into the world. And because there's brokenness in the world, because we live in a world that's broken, we live in this tension between two realities. We live in the tension between the broken and fallen world that we live in and the promise of a world that's going to be redeemed and corrected and made right. And we live in the intersection of that reality. And so we live, in a sense, we live straddling two realities, you know, and I believe that's, you know, as a Messianic rabbi, I believe in Jesus as the Messiah. And of course, Judaism has this idea of the Messiah. That's where it comes from. And the idea of the Messiah is that the Messiah is going to come and redeem and correct the brokenness that we see in the world. So I think the reality is that when Jesus gave his life as the Passover lamb, the world to come broke into this world. So there can be real healing. There can be real hope. There can be real transformation. But there's also the reality that we still live in a world that's broken and there's loss. And part of the pain is that we live in the intersection. We live in the tension of these two realities. And why any one individual goes at the time they do, there's no, I mean, obviously only, that's beyond my pay grade. I mean, God knows. But I know that, yeah.
Well, I knew it was going to be a hard one to answer, but I have another one that I'm going to ask you. And this is another one that is a mystery to me. And I think with a lot of ladies. So when you read the Bible and you see Jesus on the cross and you know the last things that he does from the cross, his last breaths, yeah. We know that one of the last things that he did was to see his mother, Mary, who was a young widow. She had to have been probably in her 40s. And then he asked John to care for her. The reason why he did that it is, from what I've studied, is because in Roman times, not only would she have been vulnerable, but she probably would have had an excruciating future being a woman alone in those circumstances. And that's the last thing, of course, he would want, to create more pain for his own mother. Now, you know, in those scriptures, the way I read them is that Jesus himself is asking his trusted ones, which I see as all of us, to care for the vulnerable women, the women we hold so close and dear to us. My question is, I don't see a lot of that in society. And I'm wondering, why is that? Because that is such an important passage, and it's very prominent. And I'm certain that God chose that moment to point towards Mary, to see her in so much pain and vulnerability. And that's the reason why scriptures like James 1:27 exist, why Isaiah 1:17 talks about being the defender for widows. So why don't we see more of that in the world right now?
Yeah, and again, I think it goes back to a bigger issue, which is, I think that we have traded the message of the good news, the message of the scriptures, the message of both the Hebrew scriptures and the New Testament message of Jesus and the disciples. We've traded the message of the good news in the kingdom of God for the American dream.
It's not just American.
No, well, it's again, we're in this context, but I think around the world. So I think that the reality is that we've made the gospel, we've made the scriptures into something that's about my personal fulfillment and my personal blessing and my personal benefit, where we've lost the idea of, because again, it's a very self-help message, right? Which is kind of got infused, where the message is, Jesus, take up the cross and follow me, right? So we've missed that. And I think there's a lot of, I think people have settled for the good news is kind of believe this and you'll go to heaven. Okay. And it's all about getting me somewhere that I want to go. And it misses the point of, it's not just about salvation, it's about transformation. that we have a responsibility to be personally transformed, and we have a responsibility to transform and to care for those that are around us. And it means becoming like the one who we say we follow. And I think that's kind of not happening. And, we wind up with congregations that are more like country clubs than they are communities. We wind up with congregations where people go for entertainment more than they go for community, accountability, spiritual growth, spiritual development. I mean, one of the things that drew me to my faith in Yeshua, Jesus as the Messiah, there was many things along that road. But one of the things that I love is that, the Hebrew scripture says God looked down and he saw the world was broken and was suffering, and he saw there was no one that was willing to go and fix it. And so, from my belief, God comes down in the person of Yeshua, Jesus. The word became flesh and dwells among us. Why is that so important? It becomes so important because God didn't just look down from heaven and say, oh, that's really, I feel bad that all my children are suffering. He became one of us, and he suffered along with us. And there's no suffering. If you want to say, where was God during my loss? Well, the Father was the same place when his son was lost, when his son died, right? So, I mean, so I guess what I'm saying is he doesn't ask us to go through anything that he himself wasn't willing to go through. And so we need to have that same empathy, that same sort of care, that same sort of concern. And when we don't, we're missing it. And widows should be a priority, and women should be a priority, and the defenseless should be a priority. In fact, in Judaism, on Yom Kippur, in the Day of Atonement, you read Isaiah 58, which this is the type of fast that I desire, says the Lord, to loose the bonds of wickedness, to free people of their injustice, to clothe and to feed those that are hungry and naked. This is the type of fast that I delight in.
Well, that right there, what you just said. So a big part of what I dream. Okay, so the Holy Spirit speaks to me in my dreams. It speaks to a lot of people in dreams, but they don't always identify it as that way, I believe. So in my dreams, I dream of a world where 300 million widows that exist around the world right now, they're caring for 500 million, 300 million widows, 500 million fatherless kids. Okay. I dream of a world when you become widowed, not only does a place of faith actually come to your aid, like John, men, women, communities. And I wonder what kind of world we would have as far as poverty. I wonder if human trafficking would end. I wonder about all these things. Historically, it's never happened. Literally, we're seeing almost for widows, being almost marginalized and oppressed. It's the same in biblical times. So what would a world look like? And I envision those things sometimes in my dream. And because I see what happens to the Motor Widows Club ladies, and I see the beauty, I see the kinsmen redeemers that they meet. I see the community that comes around them, and they do go out and they do amazing things in God's name and out of love and compassion. And I don't, sometimes I don't know how to explain to people how they can be a part of that. They can be a part of creating that like wave of love around the world. All these women want is to be seen and heard and respected, and their hand held, and someone to care. And that's what James 1:27 says. And so, when women experience the opposite of that, that's where the lack of hope, that's where the lack of faith, like it's evil. But be honest with you, evil's winning. Evil's definitely winning when it comes to widows. There's no doubt about it, because I know too much about what's happening around the world.
No, but again, I think that's why we're talking about what we're talking about developing our spiritual senses, because here's the reality. A lot of the world doesn't have faith or doesn't have practical faith, right? They might say they believe in God, but practically in their life, they're not investing a whole lot of time and energy to grow, to do the deep spiritual work, right? It's cheap to say I have faith in God, right? Faith has to be demonstrated in our actions. Okay. So it's not just an intellectual assent to something we believe is true. And I think that's part of the challenge, is that when we talk about the good eye and the bad eye, right? It goes back to the Garden of Eden, and we don't have to take, again, don't get caught up on whether it's literal or not literal, but this idea of the knowledge of the tree of good and evil, right? This is a deep spiritual principle that when we ate of the tree, okay, what it's meant to represent is that there was good and evil on the tree. Now, as a result of partaking of that tree, and there's different ways to understand it, is that we became a mixture. There's a battle within us. There's an altruistic side and there's a selfish side. There's a side that wants to do good, and there's a side that's bent towards being self-motivated and just only caring about myself. Okay, there's a part of us that only sees what we want and can't see the needs of other people. Okay, that is the broken side. That is the side that's giving in to the bad eye, to the bad inclination, to the selfish and sinful desires. There's a battle that's in us, and part of the spiritual development is that we have to overcome and develop and overcome those urges and desires, because there's a spiritual part of us, but there is an animal side of us. There's an animal aspect that's like survival of the fittest, right? It's like, hey, survival of the fittest. That's how nature works. So if you want to be nothing more than an animal, then you can operate like that. But then your life is then you're gonna have no purpose in life. Your life has no meaning. If that is all it's about, then you've missed it, right? And so therefore, people need to fight the battle, and people need to grow and develop spiritually. And part of that, when we see through the negative eye, and I think this is part of what's happened, is that you wind up treating people as things. You wind up treating relationships as transactional and not covenantal. And so therefore, people are only valuable for what they can do for me, how they meet my needs. And that's so much of the world we live in. It's like it's all transactional and not deeply relational and covenantal. And that's part of the reason why you don't even see among communities of faith the type of things you're talking about, because they're not going to they're going to have their needs met and not trying to say, how can I transform and impact the world and make a difference? And that's where it takes growth and maturity and development. But I think, again, with this idea of going back to spiritual sight on a very practical level, is that part of developing your spiritual sight, part of finding your purpose, part of being transformed as an individual, part of transforming the world, is that sight is about identity. And, one day I was praying and God said to me, "Who do you say that I am?" There's a famous passage in the New Testament where Jesus asked the disciples, "Who do you say that I am?" And but the Lord was saying, I'm not asking you, Jason, who am I? I'm asking you, Jason, to ask me, God, who do you say that I am? Meaning that God wanted me to ask him on a spiritual level, who am I? Who have you created me to be? And one of the most important questions that each one of us needs to ask is, who am I? And to ask God on a spiritual level, who am I created to be? And the question that I'm asking you is, who are you, right? That's the question that we need to ask each other. Who are you? Because identity is destiny. Can you say that with me? Identity is destiny.
Identity is destiny.
Right? So many people and things want to define you, but whatever defines you has power over you. And so we need to learn to see ourselves through the right set of lenses. We need to see ourselves and our lives and see others through spiritual eyes. We need to know who we are. One of the biggest things that keep people trapped is not knowing who they are, not knowing who they were created to be. You know, I might have shared this story with some of you, but I always tell it. You know, I was praying one day and God said to me, Jason, you're my favorite son. And I said, thank you. Now go out there and tell people when you speak that you're my favorite son. I said, no, I can't do that. And I felt like God rebuked me. He says, Jason, you know, I'm a father and you're a father, but I'm not a father like you're a father. He goes, I'm the infinite father and I can have an infinite number of number one sons and daughters. And therefore, the reason why you don't want to tell people that you're my favorite is not because you're scared of what people might say, but you don't really believe that I could love you enough that you could be my favorite. And so the reality is, no, I couldn't. Like in my mind, I couldn't imagine that I could be God's favorite. But here's the reality. Every one of you is God's favorite. Because God is infinite and he can have an infinite number of number one sons. So I want you to say, I'm his favorite.
I am his favorite.
I'm his favorite. Friends, you need to know.
I am.
Okay, all right, yes. You're his favorite.
Listen, I used to joke and I used to say to ladies, you need to put God goggles on.
Yeah.
Like if you can't see for your own, and it became a game. I'm like, you know, pick a particular pair of glasses. And when you put those on, you're going to see the world through God's eyes. Okay. And it's such a nice little thing to do because you can play that game. And when you do that, you look at social media differently with those goggles on. You look at what you do getting gas, you wherever you go, you have these God goggles on, and then you start seeing this view that God has for you. And then what that does is it, as far as biologically, mentally, you're creating new brain maps, right? So then it's not so easy to go over here and see the negative and everything that's not so great in your life. Instead, you start seeing the gratitude. You start seeing the little miracles. You start you start getting the receptivity. Your antenna goes up. I think God is always speaking to us. I just don't think some people have moved the dial to a place where they're only getting static. And so you got to move it back to the dial so that you can get the reception and you can start seeing and hearing and all of these things. And when you do that, it's a symphony and everything changes.
Absolutely. And again, I like these little sayings because they just help me to remember things, which is identity is destiny, you know, but with that, if you can't see it, you can't be it.
You can't see it, you can't be it.
Right. So if you can't see yourself as God's favorite, if you can't see yourself as having a purpose, if you can't see the promise and potential, if you can't see these things, you'll never be it. You have to see it if you're ever going to be it. And then there is a process where being is becoming, right? Right. We're in this process of becoming what we see, and it's a journey. It doesn't happen overnight. And, you know, again, like to be vulnerable, every time I share, I'm always a bit nervous, right? Do I really have something that is helpful? Do I really have something that anyone else is going to hear or want to see? You know, yeah, Jen, being is becoming. And so we have, right, Janice, we have to reject the lies, right? Mm-hmm. That says, right, because again, we'll talk more about this on the hearing, but you know, like it's hard for, like, oftentimes we see the worst in ourselves. And we have to see ourselves differently.
Yes.
And we have to see our situation. And if all we can do is focus on what's wrong with us, if all we can do is focus on like the things we don't like about ourselves, if all we can do is focus on what we don't have, then we're going to remain stuck and in prison. We have to see it through God's eyes. I love it, Jen. Yes, through the eyes of love, through the eyes of faith, through the eyes of love. And that's the thing. It's like the question that I'd raise is, how do you see yourself? And then how does God see you? Because that greatly determines how you see the world and those around you. How you see God, how you see yourself, how you believe God sees you. Those are really three important questions, because what you think about spiritually, how you see yourself, greatly determines how you see others, how you see the world. And what I love about Jesus is he treated people differently because he saw them differently. Like he had sight like no other. It's like when you look at the disciples he picked, one was a doubter, that was Thomas. One was a denier, that was Peter. One was a gangster, that was Simon the Zealot, right? I mean, one was a hater, that was Judas. But he picked them because he saw something in them that they couldn't even see in themselves. And we need those people that see that in us and then pull it out of us to the point where we actually believe it and begin to see it ourselves. And that's what you do at Modern Widows Club.
It is. And women say that all the time. You believed in me before I believed in myself, because I doubted that I could ever be fill in the blank, whatever it ends up being. And that is so reassuring. I love that the ladies now have that they can tap right into that right away, because I say this all the time: a formidable woman is a terrible thing to waste. And that's who these women are. These are women who, despite whatever their relationship was, whether it was, we know every relationship is not perfect, but, more of a, sanctification or more of a relief, this relationship. These women were loved and their marriages have been fulfilled. This is probably the hardest conversation I have with people, is that you need to see these women not as pitiful. You need to see these women as champions. They fulfilled a promise in front of God for a marriage. Is there anything more sacred?
Yeah.
That's who is in Modern Widows Club. It's women who know that, and now they're going to recreate something. And if they can tap into what God has for them, my faith was not strong at all. I tried very hard to generate it, but I was very alone, with no family around, and raising such small daughters. And I look back and I think, my life trajectory would have been different, but then I wouldn't have had as much compassion and empathy. I feel like I had to walk through a lot of fires, and I had to walk through a lot of challenges and struggles because of what I do now. Now I speak for and understand so many different of the obstacles, and I can speak with a lot of clarity with them. So now I understand because I'm 20 years down the road. So I love this topic. I think that, we're probably going to end up talking about one sense during one webinar, because this is awesome. I want to see if anybody has any questions, because we're at an hour and 7 minutes. So we're probably right at an hour from recording. And I just want to respect everybody's time, because I know everyone's loving this. Let's see if they have any questions. If anyone wants to speak, I can actually click so that you're allowed to talk. So if someone wants to actually talk to Rabbi Jason, put it in the chat and I'll open it up for you, because I would love that. Jennifer Fortune says empowering women. Yes. resilient, amazing, strong women, highly valued. Through the eyes of the king. Well, you know, one of the stories I love so much too, the Terry, the month of Elul. Is that how you say that? E-L-U.
Yeah, Elul.
Elul.
It's the Hebrew month rather than character. Yeah.
And it is and now gives hope for a beautiful future.
Yeah. Let me just say, one of the, so every Hebrew month has spiritual principles associated with. One of the ideas within the month of Elul is that, and part of the reason why that strikes me as a powerful statement, is this idea that it's, when things are broken, we tend to want to throw them away and get something new. But part of the significance of the month of Elul is the idea of the fact that it's taking the broken things and repurposing them and restore them, because God only uses broken vessels. God doesn't throw away people that are broken. God transforms broken vessels and uses them for his name's sake. And so I think that's part of the beauty of what God wants to do in this season. And he wants to he redeems them, right? Yeah, and he repurposes us, right? God redeems and repurposes and restores, and the best is yet to come. That's part of the hope.
Yeah, it is. Does anybody else have any questions at all? Thanks, Carolyn. Trudy said, thanks, Carolyn and Rabbi Jason. We are definitely.
Hey, Trudy.
We're just so happy and grateful that you take the time to really pour into so much love to us. I know that every person on this call definitely felt it tonight, and knows that our identity is our destiny. And so putting on those God goggles and knowing that I am his favorite one, or is that you? Or is that you?
All of us. No,
all of us. That's right. All of us.
Yeah,
Yes,
I mean,
right.
yeah, and I just want to say that, I mean, again, to each and every one of you, you know, you can make such a huge impact, right? Through Modern Widows Club, through the people that God brings into your life. I mean, you have no idea how the lives that you are impacting or are going to impact. It's just amazing. So be encouraged. And if some of you are saying, well, I don't know what my purpose is, listen, part of the way we find our purpose is when we look at the world and there are things that bother us. If there's things that bother you, okay, and you're like, why isn't anyone doing something about it? Why isn't anyone speaking about it? It's probably because God is empowering you to do it, right? That's what you did, Carolyn. You're like, listen, why aren't people speaking up for widows, right?
Yeah.
Well, you know, you were rightfully grieved and like not upset about it in a sense, and you're like, and there was, you know, kind of you were moved by it, and so it moved you to do something about it, to take action, right? And so, friends, this is a time for action. Take action. And it doesn't matter if it's one person or 10 people or 1 million people. It doesn't make a difference. All of us, though, have a responsibility to act.
And the time is now. Don't wait. You are so right, though. When you see something in the world, you just say, you can't see the big vision. You see what's right in front of you, and you respond.
Listen, did Rosa Parks ever think she was going to start a movement when she decided not to give up her seat on the bus? Right? She just knew that it was wrong, and she was tired of the injustice, and she decided that she was going to do something about it by not giving up her seat, and it birthed the civil rights movement with Martin Luther King, in a sense. You never know where it can go, but you just have to do something, even if it's a small act.
I always say, be careful what you ask for because it just might come true.
Yep.
Right? Well, this has been amazing. This is part one of developing our spiritual senses, and it's been amazing. So we have on September 10th, we're going to do part two. So make sure you guys sign up for that. We'll be sending everyone this copy of this recording tomorrow, and encourage more people to come on the call. I think we had about 35 people registered for this, and I loved all of your questions, and I'm just so grateful. Thank you so much, Rabbi Jason. Thanks everybody for showing up. Have a good night.
Shalom.